Good day, beautiful people. This is Natalie Silva with Life Treasures and Golden Moments. It's always good to be with you each month. And this month I have 3 different topics that I would like to share with you all. And the first one is about loss, about saying goodbye to the people or the pets that we love. I've known so many friends and acquaintances that have lost pets over the last several months. And it's very hard when you lose someone or something that you love. Many years ago, I had a very dear friend who has passed that gave me a book by Khalil Gibran. And it had very many beautiful insights that he'd written. And one is about love. And what he said was, love knows not its own depth until the hour of separation. And that is so true. The first story I'd like to share with you today is called The Rites of Passage, and the author is Robin Downing, who is a veterinarian. Some of the most poignant moments I spend as a veterinarian are those spent with my clients assisting the transition of my animal patients from this world to the next. When living becomes a burden, whether from pain or loss of normal functions, I can help a family by ensuring their beloved pet has an easy passing. Making this final decision is painful, and I have often felt powerless to comfort the grieving owners. That was before I met Shane. I had been called to examine a 10-year-old blue heeler named Belker, who had developed a serious health problem. The dog's owners, Ron, his wife Lisa, and their little boy Shane, were all very attached to Belker, and they were hoping for a miracle. I examined Belker and found he was dying of cancer. I told the family there were no miracles left for Belker, and offered to perform the euthanasia procedure for the old dog in their home. As we made the arrangements, Ron and Lisa told me they thought it would be good for 4-year-old Shane to observe the procedure. They felt Shane could learn something from the experience. The next day, I felt the familiar catch in my throat as Belker's family surrounded him. Shane seemed so calm, petting the old dog for the last time, that I wondered if he understood what was going on. Within a few minutes, Belker slipped peacefully away. The little boy seemed to accept Belker's transition without any difficulty or confusion. We sat together for a while after Belker's death, wondering aloud about the sad fact that animals' lives are shorter than human lives. Shane, who had been listening quietly, piped up, "I know why." Startled, we all turned around and looked at him. What came out of his mouth next stunned me. I never heard a more comforting explanation. He said, "Everybody is born so they can learn how to live a good life, like loving everybody and being nice." Right? The 4-year-old then continued, "Well, animals already know how to do that, so they don't have to stay as long." What a profound and touching statement from a beautiful little 4-year-old boy. He had more wisdom in his 4 years of life than a lot of people have in a lifetime. And it's so true. Time is too slow for those who wait, too swift for those who fear, too long for those who grieve, too short for those who rejoice. But for those who love, time is not. That was written by Henry Van Dyke. To tack on to this story that I just shared with you, I want to again share the story of the Rainbow Bridge. And many of you know about the Rainbow Bridge poem and about pets when they pass away, that they go to the Rainbow Bridge. But I thought this would be a great time to share this story once again. There is a bridge connecting heaven and earth. It is called the Rainbow Bridge because of its many colors. Just this side of the Rainbow Bridge is a land of meadows, hills, and valleys. All of it is covered with lush green grass. When a beloved pet dies, the pet goes to this lovely land. There's always food and water and warm spring weather. There the old and frail animals are young again. Those who are maimed are made whole once more. They play all day with each other, content and comfortable. There's only one thing missing. They are not with their special person who loved them on earth. So each day they run and play until the day comes when suddenly they stop playing and they look up. Then the nose twitches, the ears are up, the eyes are staring. You have been seen. And that one suddenly runs from the group. You take him or her in your arms in an embrace. Your face is kissed again and again and again. And you look once more into the eyes of your trusting pet. Then together you cross the Rainbow Bridge, never again to be separated. That was written by Paul C. Daum. Such a beautiful story and the beautiful thoughts that comfort us that who grieve for our pets. Thank you so much, Paul. We appreciate it. The next story that I would like to share with you is about kindness. Where there is kindness, there you will find God's love. When we act out of concern for others, we set into motion possibilities that go far beyond any involvement of our own. This story is called The Witness. It was written by Judge Fred Mester. I had wanted a law career ever since I was a boy growing up in Royal Oak, Michigan. My father, a tool and die maker, came from Springfield, Illinois, Abraham Lincoln's hometown, and from Dad I drew a love of our 16th presidents, this nation's most celebrated lawyer. I admired Lincoln's ideals, his moral tenacity, his respect for the truth, and his underlying compassion for people trying to live together peacefully under a complex system of laws. 14 years ago, when I became a judge on the 6th Circuit Court in Oakland County, Michigan, I made sure to bring my portrait of Lincoln from my law offices. Not too long ago, though, my faith in the judicial system wavered. It took a young man named Kenneth who witnessed an abominable crime to bring my beliefs back. It's not easy seeing the misery and inequity that pass through a courtroom. The 6th Circuit covers both the affluent northern suburbs of Detroit and the blue-collar city of Pontiac. Neither area is free of the monsters of drugs and crime. A divorce case in my court is likely to involve a successful professional couple as it is a couple on welfare. Income is no barrier to crime and tragedy, and in so many cases, both civil and criminal, rich and poor, children are the real victims. It can get to you after a while. Late in 1989, I heard 2 horrendous murder cases, virtually back to back. In the first, the Tarr case, 2 middle-class kids, Joe and Chris, kidnapped Mrs. Tarr, a hard-working wife and mother. They stole her car and forced her to withdraw funds from a cash machine. They drove her to a deserted location, and they executed her in cold blood. The 2 boys went back and abducted Mr. Tarr, assuring him they would free his wife if he cooperated. He, too, was forced to withdraw funds. Ultimately, Mr. Tarr met the same fate as his wife on the same lonely dead-end road. But what really got to me was that these boys drove the TARS automobiles to teenage hangouts, attending group activities such as roller skating parties, barely concealing their crime, and no one contacted the police. No one had wanted to get involved. The other case involved a young woman who wanted nothing more than to get her car washed on her way to work early one morning. The 21-year-old manager of the car wash assaulted her, beat and raped her. Then he locked her in the trunk of her car and parked in the driveway of his girlfriend's house. There the car sat for 5 days, while neighbors and others did nothing about the muffled cries emanating from the vehicle, pitiful cries that grew weaker and weaker till they faded altogether. There is nothing more serious than a murder trial, and a judge learns to tune out everything but the law. The criminal behavior in these two cases was shocking enough, but the apathy of people who had been in a position to do something really threw me. I had never seen anything like it in my years on the bench. How could people stand by and do nothing? I asked Lynn, my wife, one night near the end of the second trial. Don't they care about their fellow human beings? On a deeper and more troubling level, I wondered how God could stand by and do nothing. The woman at the car wash was a recovering alcoholic, building a new life for herself and her children. The two boys in the TAR case were good students and athletes, raised in Christian homes. How had evil so completely seeped into their lives? Were we becoming powerless as people to combat it? Then I met Kenneth Briggs. I saw Kenneth for the first time when he took the stand in my courtroom as a witness for the prosecution in a notorious crack house rape trial. Kenneth was a 14-year-old orphan at the time, living hand to mouth on Pontiac's tough east side. His father had died when he was 2 years old, and his mother, who worked 2 jobs and still managed to get Kenneth to church every Sunday, died when he was 12. Kenneth was passed from relative to relative into less and less healthy environments. This is how he came to witness the brutal assault and gang rape of a 13-year-old runaway. Testifying in court that day, Kenneth pointed his finger at the leader of the assault, who was sitting with his lawyer at the defense table. The defendant was a big man, 6'5" and 220 pounds. Anger smothered behind his hard eyes. "Are you sure this is the man?" the prosecutor asked, his voice cutting through the shocked silence in the crowded courtroom. Kenneth nodded. He had identified his 19-year-old brother, Michael. There was more to the story. Unlike so many witnesses I see, Kenneth had no plea bargained his way out of a prison term in exchange for testifying. He had come only by default to live with Michael in the crack house. The first night Kenneth walked through the door, without so much as a toothbrush to his name, he witnessed something horrible. A 13-year-old girl being savagely abused by 6 young men, the youngest 4 years older than Kenneth. The 6 urged Kenneth to join in on the rape. To become a man, they said. Kenneth refused. The assault went on for hours, and it petrified Kenneth. "She was covered with blood," Kenneth said. Somehow the girl's eyes focused on Kenneth. "Please help me," she whispered. Kenneth did. When Michael threatened to shoot people and ran upstairs to get a gun, the other men followed. Kenneth freed the girl, put her in a car, and sent her to the police station. He then ran as fast as he could to a friend's house, more scared than he had ever been in his life. He had violated a code of the street, and he knew he would have to pay. Eventually, his friend's mother helped Kenneth to go to the police. That's when they arrested Michael. When Kenneth finished testifying and the jury was deliberating, I turned to the detective in charge of the case, Eleanor Mickens, and expressed my astonishment, formed in part by the cynicism that had crept up on me. "What made him go through with this?" I asked. "He's just a good kid, Judge," Eleanor replied. Here was a young man who might have thought he had all the reason in the world to turn his back on society, to conform to the law of the streets. Yet something made him draw a moral line, to get involved and do the right thing. I had seen so little of it recently in my courtroom. I have no doubt it was in great part his religious training that guided him, that saved him. I understood fully how much Kenneth had risked taking the stand. "They'll eat him alive out there," I told Detective Mickens. She nodded. Already people had turned away from Kenneth, Eleanor explained. A great-aunt had ordered him not to testify. No one wanted a snitch living with them. It's time to get involved. I thought suddenly and a bit angrily. I had been so disheartened by seeing people reject their responsibilities to society, people who were more interested in protecting family members than their fellow citizens, people who refused to trust the police or testify truthfully in court. But what about me? I had to do something for Kenneth. Word of Kenneth's courageous testimony quietly spread through the courthouse and beyond. Secretaries, clerks, cops, even defense attorneys offered help. I talked to my church, First Presbyterian of Royal Oak, and they took up an offering. The cousin of a friend was able to find a family in Ontario, Canada. Kenneth could live with, and a good high school for him to attend. Many people pitched in and were able to get him away from the streets of Pontiac. 7 years had passed. Kenneth now attends Oakland University, not far from the courthouse, and we stay in touch. He is a psychology and biology major and wants to counsel inner-city youngsters like those in Pontiac. He has grown from a good kid to a good man. A year ago, the Detroit Lions football team heard about him and passed a hat around the locker room to help with his tuition. Now he has a part-time job with the team as an assistant equipment manager. Kenneth's brother, Michael, is serving life in prison. After a difficult struggle, the victim is making a life for herself. I once asked Kenneth what made him come forward. He shrugged, and he gave me a look that he said he really didn't have much choice in the matter. I know Kenneth loved his mother very much. I think he did what he knew she would have wanted, however painful the consequences. I still see tragedy and sorrow in my courtroom. Yet I now believe the vast majority of people in this society want to be kind and do right, just as Kenneth did that day on the stand. God, I know, does not stand by idly. On the contrary, what Kenneth showed me is how God has given all of us the tools we need to serve Him. For if there was ever anyone for whom doing the right thing carried a heavy cost, it was that young man. Each of us, including judges, need to stand up and be involved in our neighborhoods, at work, and through our churches and synagogues. We must help those whose obstacles in life are greater than ours. It has been said that the only thing needed for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. Kenneth saw evil and did something. My old friend Lincoln said it well. Let us have faith that right makes might, and in the faith let us to the end dare to do our duty as we understand it. Thank you, Judge, for that wonderful story. It gives us all food for thought. And like I said earlier, where there is kindness, there you will find God's love. And we must get more love in this world to make this a better place. My final story of today is about miracles in tough times. And I think we've said before, the true measure of faith comes not when all is well, but during life's trials. And this is such a story. Because, you can be skipping along and everything's just great, and all of a sudden, boom, boom, boom. So I think you'll enjoy this story. It's called An Angel's Visit, and it was authored by Nancy B. Gibbs. It was a beautiful day in June, while I was driving down a quiet highway, when a thought came to mind. Everything in my life was pretty good. I had nothing really big to worry about. It almost frightened me when that particular idea came to mind, for it seems that just the time we feel like everything is going well, the great storms come our way. A few months later, as I expected, everything changed. I lived some 65 miles from my parents. Fortunately, I had kept my part-time job in the city from where we had moved and from where I grew up, so I had ample opportunities to visit my parents. My mother began telling me odd things that my father was doing and saying. Initially, I thought she was just imagining things. Daddy couldn't possibly believe the things he was saying. She told me how Daddy was becoming paranoid and simply not acting like himself. He was still a young man, so I tried to ignore the warning signs, but soon I had to face the facts. The doctors began using scary words such as Parkinson's disease, dementia, and Alzheimer's. As frightening as those words were, however, they didn't compare to the words terminal and final stages. From that time on, my relatively calm life was transformed into a massive whirlwind. The doctors put Daddy on medication, but the drugs only caused him to become more paranoid. The medication also caused him to hallucinate, which in turn caused him to become violent. I had to admit those were some of the toughest days of my life. Knowing I had only a short time left to let my father know how much I loved him, the trips I made to my hometown increased from twice a week to sometimes 6 times a week. The only day during the week I allowed myself to rest was on Sundays, and that was only because my husband Roy and I were serving at a small country church. We had to be there. Roy was the pastor, and I taught Sunday school. I went from having nothing to worry about to being totally stressed out. I didn't slow down. I couldn't slow down. I had been told my father only had a few months to live. The family advocate at the hospital talked candidly to me one day. It was his opinion that Daddy would live much longer than everyone thought. "Your father has the heart of a 20-year-old, Mrs. Gibbs," he said. "But he has the mind of an 80-year-old. Your family has a long road to travel." He was right. Months turned to years. Those years were not quality years, however. Dad became bedridden and quickly came to the point that he rarely responded to us. He didn't even know us. He resided in a nursing home for several years. Daddy experienced many painful days and nights in that place, and the whirlwind of emotions took a toll on our entire family. After a couple of years, Roy decided that I needed a break. "Our anniversary is approaching, Nancy. Let's go out of town for a couple of days." I hesitated, but accepted. I worried about being far from Daddy and was concerned that Mom would need me, but I knew Roy was right. I had to get away. We packed our bags and off we went to a wonderful park 3 hours from home. For the first time ever, we stayed in a bridal suite. The room was gorgeous and the weather was perfect. The first morning there, we walked around the park, enjoying the scenery, the gift shop, and the exhibits. I thought of Daddy and constantly wondered how he was and how he was doing, but I tried to stay focused on enjoying our anniversary for Roy's sake. We returned to our hotel room to get ready to go out for lunch. Roy left the room to get ice. I fell down on my knees beside the bed and I prayed. "Oh God, please send an angel to take care of Daddy," I whispered. I heard the key in the door and I knew that Roy had returned. I stood up and brushed away the wrinkles on my outfit. "Let's go eat," Roy enthusiastically shouted. We had lunch and went shopping, and I laughed for what seemed the first time in a long time. I felt a sense of peace. We returned to the hotel later that day, and I decided to call my mother to check on Daddy to see what kind of day that they'd had. Mother gave me an update. Nothing much had changed, but just before we hung up the telephone, Mom stopped me. "Oh, yeah, Nancy, I need to tell you something that happened at the nursing home today." I went out to get Daddy something for lunch. When I walked back in the front door, a nurse met me. She told me a stranger was in Daddy's room and had been there for a while. I sat at the other end of the telephone, speechless. They told me, Mom further explained, that they were watching her closely since they had never seen her there before. I walked into the room, and a stranger was praying with Daddy. When she concluded her prayer, she turned and looked at me. Then Mom relayed the entire conversation to me. "Hi," this young woman said. "I know you don't know me, but God sent me here. I live across town. As I was pulling out of my driveway, He guided me here." When she got out of the car in the nursing home parking lot, she said she asked God to show her which room to visit. As I walked down the hall, He told me this was the room. So I stopped. "I hope you don't mind." My mom assured her that it was fine for her to visit and to pray with Daddy any time. She hugged my mother. Before she left, she shared a message from God with my mom. "God said to tell you that everything is going to be fine." When my mom hesitated, I asked her an important question. "Did this happen about 12:30? "It was about 1 when I got back to the nursing home," she replied. "Why?" "That was the time I asked an angel to take care of Daddy," I replied. "Do you think she was an angel, Nancy?" my mom asked. "Do you have a better explanation for her visit?" I followed. There was silence at both ends of the telephone for a few seconds. I was certain God had heard and answered my prayer. My mom was convinced she had encountered an angel earlier that afternoon. We both experienced a myriad of emotions, but in addition, we both believed the message God had sent that day. Everything was going to be fine. Daddy never walked again. He didn't experience an instant and complete recovery. A couple of years later, however, Daddy left a place of pain and entered a place where he would never hurt again, and everything was finally fine with him. Mom and I both knew at that time and then have oftentimes talked about how an angel visited Daddy's room that day. As far as we know, this kind lady never returned to the nursing home to visit with Daddy. But somehow, I believe a miracle occurred on that day. Daddy left this world behind and entered the gates of heaven. Who knows? This angel just might have been sent by God once again to escort my father home. Thank you for sharing your time with me today, and thank you to all the wonderful authors who share their stories with us, and to Nancy who shared that story, An Angel's Visit. And for you that are going through tough times of your own right now, I pray that you will find the faith and hope to go on and know that there's brighter skies and more peaceful days heading your way. Until next time, take care, beautiful people, and may God bless. This is Natalie Silva with Life Treasures and Golden Moments.